Welcome to the CFDA's Professional Development Series in recognition of Women's History Month. Our series celebrates the talented professionals that make up the fashion industry. With over 80% of fashion's workforce comprised of women, we identified 3 inspiring female talents from various different disciplines who honor the craft and artisanship of design and who support and uplift the work of other women. This year's national theme for Women's History Month is celebrating women who tell our stories, which aligns beautifully with the first woman we're interviewing in this series, Emily Adams Bode Aja, the founder designer of Bode, a luxury menswear brand that expresses a sentimentality for the past through the study of personal narratives and historical techniques. Emily was the first female designer to show at New York Fashion Week Men's. In 2016, her brand began with a collection of one-of-a-kind garments composed entirely of antique textiles. She continues to reinvigorate American menswear through the art of storytelling and preservation with foundational one-of-a-kind pieces alongside historical reproductions. Emily launched women's wear during Paris Fashion Week 2020. Emily has been recognized with numerous awards, including 3 CFDA awards and a Woolmark Prize Karl Lagerfeld Award. She was also an LVMH Prize finalist, GQ's Breakthrough Designer of the Year, and she was honored on the Business of Fashion 500 and Forbes 30 Under 30. Today, she will be joined by Zach Winokur, who is a stage director and producer who works between dance, opera, and musicals. Zach is co-founder and artistic director of American Modern Opera Company, served as artistic director of New York Pop-Ups, and co-teaches transdisciplinary storytelling class at Harvard. So thank you both so much for joining us today. And Zach, please take it away.
Thanks. Hi, Emily.
Hi.
It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And I have to say, every time, I'm wearing your clothes right now, and I find your clothing so moving. Like, it's incredibly good storytelling all the time. And I feel like since all of your work is so personal in so many ways and so narratively driven, and since we're celebrating Women's History Month together, I wondered if we could actually start with your family. Your aunts, your mom, what do these women mean to you in your clothes and in your practice?
Yeah, of course. Well, I guess it would start there. I think when I first launched Bode, I was looking largely at a lot of the men in my family and men who I was friends with or in relationships with, like high school boyfriends or things like that. And when I went upon launching women specifically, I looked to my mom and all of her sisters. Throughout the years, I've definitely taken a lot of inspiration from my mom's clothing that she wore in high school, but the women's launch really was specific to a story of my mom from when she was in her college years. But I think it's definitely the way in which I was raised, in my upbringing, that has really allowed me to be the designer that I am today. My mom and my aunts would take me antiquing. They really cared about family storytelling, as well as, cherishing items and saving them and mending them and repairing them, as well as just craft in general. So, I have one aunt in particular who was always showing us, craft techniques, or I have little quilt pillows or doll beds made with miniature quilts. That was really a part of who she was as a person, and that's something that I carry with me still today.
Amazing. And are there, going outwards from your family, who are the other women whose stories you're wanting to tell, or whose stories you're wanting to interact with, or whose histories you're interested in right now?
Okay, well, I guess it's twofold. So there's definitely people who I interact with who I'm inspired by, from a manufacturing standpoint. That's like women who we work with, who are entrepreneurs in their own right as well, and have like really worked to create craft communities. But I think that, I mean, two women in particular that have been really inspiring in the work that they're doing, that's not necessarily like the hyper fashion community, are Marcella and Kavita, these two women who have a program that is called Extant that I've given various talks at. They're really involved in reinvigorating craft communities, but also helping young entrepreneurs where I was 7 years ago, trying to understand how to reproduce historical techniques and sell them today and have it as like a viable business. So that's something that they've done in Mexico. They've partnered with UNESCO, or they often partner with governments in different regions. The most recent one I did was in Mallorca. So I think that, you know, those are two women that I look to for how they're really talking about the world of craft and in largely like female craft and domestic craft, and how that's translating into business today, and why it's important that we really celebrate those things so that they don't disappear forever.
And your business is run by many, many women.
Oh,
Can
yes,
you,
that's true too.
can you also talk about your own business and how it's run?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely motivated by our team. You know, of course, our company is primarily women. All of our VPs are women. Yeah, all of our VPs are women. In director level, everybody except for my brother-in-law and my husband is, you know, female on that level at Bode. And then as a whole, we are majority women. I think it's really important. At past jobs, apart from I interned at like Ralph Lauren and Marc Jacobs, those are obviously like founded by men, but the people that brought me into those organizations were women. And a lot of the people, almost everybody else I worked for in college, and then right after college, were women. So it's something that I think it's really important to me. When I first graduated, I had been doing interviews at a couple different companies, and people, there was one company in particular that said, I don't think you'd really fit on this team because it's like the menswear team is a boys club. And I feel like that wouldn't happen today. You wouldn't turn away somebody in menswear if they're a female designer. And that's only been, 7 years. I started Bode 7 years ago, it's quite wild to think of, that menswear is no longer a boys club in America. It hasn't been for a while. In the UK, I feel like you see a lot more female designers doing menswear. But in the US, there really weren't, there were women on teams, but not necessarily like eponymous labels as much.
And so is it fair to say that like until you started Bode that you hadn't worked in a place that was majority run by women?
I hadn't worked it was all women's wear companies. Yeah. The menswear teams were all men, from what I can remember. Yeah, because I worked on the women's wear, or I interned on the women's wear team at Ralph, and on Roughwear was what it was called, and tailored wear. So, at Marc Jacobs, the team I was on, special projects, was all men except for like 2 people. So,
and what about like, obviously you've just launched this women's wear collection, and I see women wearing your clothes all the time, but it is a menswear line, and so or it was at the start, and I'm just curious like what it meant to you to be majority women making menswear.
That's definitely part of the story too. I think it's, if you were to look a couple of years ago, 5 to 10 years ago, I'd say most of the men's boutiques in America also were run and owned by men. And I loved the idea of having my own retail, but I really wanted to create a brand for men that really had like a female sentiment to it. And it was only natural for me to design for a guy, to launch a business that was menswear. I was most challenged, or I was most attracted to menswear from the perspective of like making something for somebody outside of myself. I wasn't as interested in just making clothing for myself, and I couldn't really distinguish myself as not the consumer who I'd make for if I was making women's wear, because making clothing is so personal for me anyway. So I wanted to launch something that I was making something for somebody else. I could really change the culture in which another person dressed, or males in general dressed, and how they thought about material and material culture. That's what led me to launch Bode. I didn't believe that the aesthetic that I wanted to offer really existed in the market.
I think that's true. Were there any specific women in the fashion industry who were pivotal in helping you kind of find your way?
I mean, like I said, I think all the women who I worked for, whether that was, a lot of female designers I worked for, like both smaller and bigger, people who have now scaled to like billion-dollar companies, but also people who, have since shuttered. But I learned a lot from the retail environment, from working in stores and women who had really, really small businesses and that were doing it all themselves. Everything from photo shoots to buying. And that was really intriguing to me. I still do think it's very important to have retail experience and to have your hand in like a million different aspects of the business before you launch your own business, so that you can know the scale of things. You can know what it means to be a Ralph Lauren, but you can also know what it means to be a tiny little store in Chinatown. But one person in particular who I'd say I'd look to often, I didn't necessarily have like an intimate relationship to her. I had interviewed her for a magazine. I had met her at her factory, and that's Eileen Fisher. But I wasn't, I'm not close to her. I know her because I was introduced actually probably through the CFDA. But I loved the way that she has built a business and has really catered to her same customer throughout the years. As she aged, her customer aged with her. I thought it's like such a kind of a beautiful story. Her starting with just like making clothes in her apartment like I did, and then having her first store, and then how retail was like such a big part of her life, just like it is a big part of ours, at Bode, as well as staying true to her brand ethos while really changing the way in which we make clothes through, her like take back programs and all these washing techniques and reuse, whereas it still feels very much her, but a lot of bigger partners have looked to how they've done it, owning their own factories and, things like that to really incorporate into, other businesses.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful story. I mean, I also think like, in addition to like sort of looking up, right? So much of what I see you doing is like looking at people your own age and younger. And I'm wondering also, how you're empowering other women and female creatives and professionals in the work that you do and in the world that you're making.
Yeah, I mean, apart from, I guess, at Bode, of course, we offer internships and things like that. But I'd say, I don't know. I mean, it's always been a priority to me to offer mentorship, not just like through internships. I do panels, I do judging talks. I'll go to colleges, we host college students for talks, but also, I'll take on individuals to even if it's just one Zoom call, or if it's like a few, but to really have meetings with young entrepreneurs, mostly women. I have had one guy where I can answer any questions, because likely, like, I've had the exact same issues in my life and in my career, whether it's like with scaling or with stores not paying you, or if it's employees, how to hire and fire and HR issues, and, the little things that no one really talks about as you start. And I mean, they're actually like really big things, but even getting your employees on healthcare or on payroll, not just having contractors, all of those, really taking the time to like meet with younger brands and people, even if they're not younger than me in terms of age, but in their, in their brand age, and just help them out. But it really is, I'd say, it's a priority that I always have had, of like dedicating my time or my team's time to doing the panels and the talks and things like that, because I always wanted somebody who actually liked to do them, and so you hope that, like, okay, like, what would you want to hear if you were, just about to graduate college? Like, what should I take this job? Should I not take this job? And yeah, I think it's important to like do those workshops and those panels, and even if it's not like the best, what you'd think is the best use of your time, but to really like at least do as, say yes to some of those opportunities for other people.
Yeah. I mean, just a couple more questions, but I think one of the things that's so interesting to me about your work and the world that you've made is how many different kinds of people are engaged and interested in the work that you're doing, and how powerfully those narratives that you kind of put into the clothing and into the storytelling around your brand, that people really carry with them. And I'm curious for you, like outside of fashion, who are women that you're looking up to, that you're paying attention to, that you're excited about, and who give you energy, either in your artistic practice or in the kind of business making that you do?
Outside of fashion, like in a bubble here. Well, outside of fashion, I definitely think it's my family. I had, the pleasure of growing up with another aunt, actually, who was a master goldsmith and who had her own business. I think it's important to be able to see how women shape their careers and their personal lives. It's something that I was able to receive from, or see from having so many women in my family, but also by working for a lot of women. It's often hard, I find myself having a hard time understanding, like, how do people have kids in this industry, but how do people have kids in another industry and still be like a full-time working person or an entrepreneur, having your own business? I'd say within fashion, though, I probably, I wouldn't be here without like the judges of like CFDA programs that I had done in Fashion Fund, and like DVF coming to my studio and actually taking the time to email introduce me to somebody, or Anna Wintour championing me, since almost day one, and really still encouraging me to meet people along the way. Also, Aurora James has her own fashion business, but the bigger aspect of her life is her nonprofit, I'd say, at this moment in time. So I think she's extremely inspirational to me, because she's really able to get all of these people really excited about businesses and the 15% pledge. And that's, it's a really hard thing to do, to start a nonprofit and be this quickly growing and scaling, while having your own business on the side. But I'd say other women outside of fashion, like maybe my sister. I mean, she went to business school, so that's, quite inspirational to me. She's a consultant at McKinsey, so very, very different life outside of fashion, but still problem solving on a day-to-day basis. So that's really important. My sister-in-law as well, being able to problem solve, while also, like I said, still understanding what you want as a female, in terms of your personal life, whether it's like children or, living in what state or relationships and things.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, also like from your family to the kind of bigger fashion family. Two more questions. What does Women's History Month mean to you?
Well, I'd say like probably first and foremost awareness. It means almost, similar to what I said about with like on younger businesses. It's really prioritizing doing something around, like taking the time for Women's History Month to bring awareness, to take time to talk about things, to do questions like this and panels and interviews, and really celebrate females working, and really females who have like a really particular vision for their life and for culture and society in general. I think that's what Women's History Month is to me.
And how would you encourage other fashion brands to really make an investment in the advancement of women in this industry?
Oh, I mean, I think it's like taking taking a chance on people. I think that was really key. It's not like my mentors in the past really, I mean, maybe they did believe in me 100%, but I'm sure that, it wasn't, like I said, worth their time like to really be like mentoring me. But it's really important to give back. I think it's like, you can't forget to, do what you wish somebody had done for you. And being a female founder and owner, I can only, I want to stay true to that. And really, that could be as simple as like giving somebody a factory contact, or it could be, empowering young entrepreneurs like in a craft workshop or something like that. But I think it's, I'd say like other companies, it's really, participating in programming. I think that's like a really easy way to get involved, to really champion women and female entrepreneurs who otherwise might not have, the same resources to be a part of the industry.
Cool. Is there anything else that you want to talk about or add?
I don't think so. I mean, thank you for asking all these really insightful questions.
No, well, thank you. I mean, it's always such a pleasure to talk with you, and I find you incredibly inspiring and so powerful as an artist and a thinker, and also as a businesswoman. And I think what you're doing is so extraordinary and so moving. And I hope that other people commit the time and energy as you are to empowering other women and other professionals to do work in the meaningful way that you are doing it.
Oh, thank you. No, that means a lot. I mean, I feel like I didn't, on that point, I didn't really mention like a lot of the female makers that we work with, and craft communities and factory owners, just like a lot of these bigger factories took a chance on me, when I couldn't and still can't sometimes, meet order minimums. I'd say like taking a chance on smaller factories to grow with you and scale with you. That's another way, that we work with women, and also that I think that other companies can work with women, because it's not always the best financial choice, but I think in the long run, it really pays off. And yeah, I appreciate, reflecting on all of these questions that you asked. It's important, and I'm glad that, we were able to talk.
Totally. Well, thanks so much for the time.
Thank you, Zach.
See you.